Okay, we are right on the button at 6 o'clock. I'm Randy Lewis, Mayor of Bountiful. Welcome to all of you who are here. I know we have several. Most of our city council is supporting all of you in the back. We appreciate you being involved. Whatever reason you're here for, we're very appreciative of you being here and having a piece of this responsibility of the bond with your opinions. So we appreciate you very much. So the purpose of this is those who are in favor of the bond and for those who are not in favor of the bond. And all of you, everyone that's here is welcome to speak tonight. I'll speak to that in a moment though. The first thing we're going to have is we'll have a presentation by the city from Gary, our city manager, Gary Hill. And then we have Ron Mortensen, who will give the opposing view on the bond. And we'll give him the same amount of time. Following that, you will be given up to 3 minutes apiece to come, and please come up to the podium. If you'll give your name and your address, we'd really appreciate it. And luckily we have our parks director who now is in charge of timing. So he's added it to his list of important duties as a director. So he'll give you a 30-second little chide to say it's time to give up. And as I said, anyone who wants to speak, be sure that you do so. By the way, thanks for everyone coming with masks on. I think we're following what we're asked to do, and I know we have different opinions about that, but I really appreciate it from the standpoint of being the mayor. Thank you. Finally, and most importantly, I think it's so important for us to really respect one another. I don't like the bleeding down I see sometimes, even all the way into a great community like ours, of the pain and sometimes the anger and stuff that comes from the politics and decisions nationally. Sometimes they bleed right down into where we live. And the other night, a very passionate discussion on the mascot at Bountiful High School was held, and those young people, although passionate and had different opinions about the mascot, were very respectful of each other. So I think they set a great tone and a great example for what we're doing here tonight. So with that, I will, one thing that I failed to mention is that we want to go we'll say one in favor of, once we start with you out there in the public, one in favor of, and then one that is opposed, and we'll just go until everyone's satisfied. I think you might think though, in terms of if somebody said everything really that you wanted to say, you're welcome to come up, but you might consider that what you were thinking has already been taken care of. With that, I'm going to turn time over to the city to give us a presentation for a few minutes, and that is Gary Hill, our city manager.
We will be taking our masks off to speak because it's too hard to be heard through the mask and the microphone. You're all welcome to do the same thing. I'd like to take the opportunity to talk about why the city's considering a bond at this time and is asking voters to consider a bond in just a couple of weeks. Earlier this year, the school district decided to close Washington Elementary and gave the city the opportunity to purchase the property. This is consistent with school district practice throughout the county, and whenever they close a school, they offer the local community a chance to buy the property. The school district told us that if the city chose not to buy the property, then it would be made available to the public and would be sold to the highest bidder. With that, city council decided to put it on the ballot and ask voters to whether or not they wanted some additional field space in the city. Of all the requests that we hear for recreation use in the city, consistently it's two things. It's more field space and more trails. For those that have kids, surveys, there were public meetings where input was taken before a decision was made and designers was picked for that. As far as the park is concerned, the primary use will be fields. That is the major need down there, but there is ample room on those 10 acres to make some of these other improvements, if for which there will be, as long as we have enough funding through the bond pay for and those that are desired by the vote. Now, trails, $2 million is the remaining amount that would be available from the bonds. As I mentioned, one of the other major items the public is asking us for are additional trails, and that means an expansion of our trail system. And last year, in a survey that was done, that was the #1 recreation idea that was identified. And so the $2 million would be used to improve, but primarily expand the existing trail system. Those improvements will include improvements that will connect canyons above us, that will reduce congestion on trails by providing more trails or making certain trails one way. Anyone who's been on Muir Park's trail knows that that's become very, very popular. And a project that's been identified in our trail master plan that was adopted this last year is to create a single downhill loop that would separate hikers and uphill bike users from those that want to come down the trail. That's just an example of the kind of improvements. Similarly, those improvements that what will be identified are those that have been put out in the Trails Master Plan, as well as our Bountiful Trails Advisory Committee will be working with the public to see what other priorities we have. I think it's really important that the public understands that none of the bond funds will be used to purchase property or build a trail in Mill Creek Canyon. So that's the Creekside Trail for which there was quite a bit of public debate. It will stay on the Trails Master Plan, and no bond funds will be used to do anything with that trail. Finally, the question of cost. How much is this going to cost you? So an $8 million bond will cost an average home in Bountiful, which is valued at $371,000, about $33 a year. So that's $2.75 a month for 20 years. Once the debt is paid off, the tax rate goes away. I might point out that I'm very happy to be here with Ron Mortensen, who I know he's probably going to mention that tax increase, the Bountiful's rate is a 20% tax increase to our rate. However, I think it's important to realize that Bountiful's tax rate is a small portion of the overall tax bill that you pay. A question I'd like to ask people is, how much of your property tax bill do you think actually goes to Bountiful City? Think about that for a second. 7%. So every $100 that you pay in property tax, $7 only goes to Bountiful City. The other 93% goes to the schools, or goes to the county, or some of the other various tax districts. So the actual increase to your property tax bill is only 1%. Even though our rate is 20%, the actual increase goes only 1%. In conclusion, Bountiful, this is a city that has been built out. We just simply don't have any opportunities to do this. Something like this, to build open recreation space. The alternative is likely that the school district will sell it, and it will become homes or housing of some sort. And also something that's desirable for many. I know that we're all concerned about pressure development on Wasatch Front, and the city council thinks it's a great opportunity to provide open space and provide recreation opportunities with you. Thank you. That was close.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Very well done. And Ron Mortensen.
Well, I'm going to turn the microphone on for Ron. Please do, brother.
Well, I appreciate everyone for coming out this evening, and I'm going to operate based on the premise that most of you have already looked at the arguments for and against the bond, have a pretty good idea where you're at. So I just wanted to throw out some things maybe we hadn't focused on. So 3 areas that I'd like to look at is, first, what is the impact of this tax increase on the most vulnerable in our community and on our small businesses? And second, how is the city managing existing park space and construction projects? And third, what are some alternatives to a property tax increase? What are the other options? So, you know, it's really easy for someone to, some of us to pay $30 extra a year in property taxes. But I find it concerning that when the advocates of the bond say that the tax increase is less than, quote, the cost of a typical soda per month, unquote. Now, they ignore the fact that for some food insecure families that need money to purchase food, that extra soda a month would buy 3 loaves of bread or a gallon of milk. And that's important to think of that, what this means to certain families out there, especially when we have record numbers of people going to the food bank. The second thing is the 3257 increase is not the only increase we're looking at this coming year. The sewer district is already going to have to raise our sewer rates another $66 a year, plus $22 in property tax increase. So there's another $88 that will be coming along. And the school district is looking at a bond for school construction. So that will also be another property tax hit that we might face. And so when we're thinking of these vulnerable people and businesses, it all adds up. That adds up to real money for people. We've had some reports from citizens that the city's having trouble maintaining and caring for the existing park space that we have. This issue was raised just in this last Tuesday night's city council meeting when a concerned citizen brought it up. And this morning I stopped by the Cheese Park to look at the pickleball courts that are there. And 2 of them were lacking nets, and they had a blue ribbon across serving as a net that the players had put up so they could use the park, use the field. And I was told by 2 people using the courts that as the concrete had been damaged and the repairs on it had been put in with a soft material, and so when the ball hits that, it just dies. And so a lot of the courts, they have to replay the point over and over again. And I noticed also that the concrete rock walkway leading into the courts was cracked and it was offset, it had been raised, which poses a safety hazard. And unfortunately, the city does not have a stellar record when it comes to bringing projects in on budget and on time. And for example, the plaza started out originally at 3.5 million, things were added on, construction delays and other things, and it eventually ended up costing $9 million. And the city hall had an estimated cost of 6.5 million, and it ended up at 8 million. And I got these figures through a records request, so it comes directly from the city. And finally, I would ask if there aren't better ways of just getting what we need rather than raising everyone's property taxes. And especially when we're told that we have to pass the bond in order to find out what exactly we get for that money. Since the school district's already spending $400,000 over here to develop the Washington School property, they're putting in irrigation system, they're putting in, they've leveled the land, putting in irrigation, they put in topsoil and they're sodding it. So it'll be ready with playing fields for the schools this spring. So why are we buying the property for fields if they're already doing it? And then they are saying that in order to get the land, we have to agree to an interlocal agreement that gives the school districts right to use those playing fields. Why doesn't the school district just keep the place and let us use the fields when they're not using it? Another option would be for the city to repurpose some existing park space for pickleball courts and a skate park, like it did for the dog park. They took an existing park and turned it into something else. Why not follow the example of the veterans who are providing the city with a beautiful veterans park, totally paid for with private funds? So how about it if the city made available a space for pickleball courts, a skate park and other facilities like it did for the Veterans Park, and then have those who want those facilities go out and raise the money and develop those properties for the city. And during a work meeting about a skate park several weeks ago, an individual said, you know, we're willing to raise some money for this. We're willing to put our money into this. Why don't we let them do it rather than raise the taxes of everyone? And during a public hearing on the Trails Master Plan, there were comments also made then that we're willing to put money into this. So again, why come back to the taxpayer and put it on the back of the most vulnerable people and the people that can, these small businesses that are really struggling. So in conclusion, what I'd like everyone to think about tonight when you make your comments is think about, are there alternatives that we could come forward without raising taxes? And let's find a way for people to roll up their sleeves and to really take ownership of some of these things and to do it through private funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Ron. So I'm glad for the clapping because it was, I'm going to say a reminder before I invite you up to the podium now to speak, and that is, if you would hold applause, that would be really helpful to us tonight in order to have this go smoothly. You're welcome. Maybe one other thing, and that is just one person at a time, but also one person just comes up once during the time. Some people are going to speak and then they're going to think of something else and they're going to want to come up again. But if you would just do it one time, that'd be great. So we're going to turn the time now to you, the public of Bountiful, here to say what you would like to say. So please, thank you. Again, if you'd give your name and where you're from, that'd be wonderful.
My name is Rick Smith. I live at 527 West, 2800 South. I'm one of the poor people that he's talking about. My property taxes went up $500 and I didn't do anything, no improvements or anything. And they're saying, well, real estate's going up. Well, they could adjust the tax rate. I'm struggling, and they say it's only $33 or whatever. Well, every amenity or every whatever they are, just like he says, raises. And I'm really struggling. You know, I go by Bountiful Park every day, and there's hardly anyone there unless they have an activity. If Bountiful has an activity, then they get a bunch of people. But there's hardly any, you know, there'll be a few kids playing on the playground. Why don't they put a soccer field there on it? That is not used that much. This isn't in Bountiful, but I go by the Centerville Park, and there's a big thing of grass and nothing's used there. There's a few people on the basketball courts, but that's hardly ever used. We are struggling with water. Grass takes the most water there is. That's what mainly water goes to, is watering grass and landscape. You're gonna put a whole 10 acres or whatever in grass, and we're struggling in water. It's gonna have to be watered. It's gonna have to be maintained and taken care of. So they don't even talk about maintaining these parts, just like he said on it. I have a number of other things, but I'll let other people comment. But I just, you know, if we're money trees and they just pluck the money off and then tax us more and pluck some more money off it, you know, they want to borrow, tax. And it might not just be Bountiful, but everybody. Borrow, tax.
Next. Somebody for?
My name is Marie Jorgensen. I live at 252 West, 750 South, which means I live right smack around the corner from Washington's property. And I do not want homes there. They took away our school, which means now our kids go to these other schools and they've inundated those schools and those schools are upset. So if we bring in more housing, that brings in more families and more kids to go to those schools that are already upset that their schools got taken over by our kids. I also am a parent that traveled all over to play soccer and lacrosse and football because there was no fields for my kids to play, even though I live right around the corner from the park. They weren't maintained for that type of thing. So I know that that's a lot to ask, but we'll see greater cost to our city by turning that over and letting it become more high density housing. They talk about the dog park that is also in our neighborhood. They had to close it down because it got so inundated that it was destroyed, within a matter of months because people are living in apartments and they need green space. So they go to that one little park. They said that people came from all over the county going to that one little park because they need green space. They're building apartments everywhere they can. Every corner that's available has apartments going up on it. We don't need any more apartments. We need green space. And I realize that there's property tax issues, but I also know that there's programs for seniors or veterans or persons that are low income that get discounted benefits for their property taxes. Doesn't address for everybody, but there is some issues for that. So that's my.
Thank you. One against?
Good evening. I'm Ted Woolley. I live at 1750 South, 1300 East here in Bountiful. I am all in favor of the park, but I'm against bonding. I do not want to see my kids who have been able to purchase homes in Bountiful and myself be indebted for the next 20 years with a interest on a bond. I've tried to get myself out of debt, and I think the city should stay out of debt. As Ron mentioned, the school district has already put $400,000 into that property. And since how they already own the property, why not just have the school district keep the property and the city go into an agreement with them and put in these facilities that the city manager was talking about? It would seem like a likely thing to do instead of the city buying it, spending $3.5 million and then another $2.5 million to put in whatever. It seems like very expensive whatevers. So just like to offer that the alternate to let the school district and the city go into an agreement to provide this, upgrade the facilities to what they need and still have those soccer fields, not go into agreement afterwards, after the fact, to let the school district use it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And a person for?
Hello, my name is Rick Tennant. I live at 571 Cedar Circle here in Bountiful. I'm a transplant from Syracuse. I'm a longtime watcher, first time speaker. So thanks for having me. I grew up in Syracuse, and it was during the time when we couldn't get out to Antelope Island, right? And so if you guys remember that, the causeway was broken because of the flooding. And we tried it a couple times in high school with bad results, but that's another story. So talk to me after. In short, we didn't have a lot of trails. So we had to go up to South Ogden or up to other places. And here in Bountiful, we have some gorgeous trails. We have some awesome foothills, and there's so much going on here. We'd come down here for the last 20 years. I've been coming down here and riding the trails at Muir Park. And COVID, don't know what's going on with this year, but there's a lot more people out on the trails. If you haven't been out, I would encourage you to take a walk up Muir Park. Do it midday, because a lot of the mountain bike teams, Viewmont, Bountiful as well, we practice in the late afternoons, but midday is not too bad. We have a bunch of kids on the team that are great little athletes, right? And it gets them out on the trails. We do feel bad when we're coming down the trails and we run into a hiker. We love to see hikers out on the trails, but as we come down, sometimes it scares the hikers. And frankly, it scares some of our younger riders who aren't as apt at handling the bikes at higher speeds. And so with that, we've had a couple of hikers I talked to. I said, hey, I said, we've got our blue group or our newbies coming down, so be nice to them. And we actually had one hiker say, I'll throw a stick in their spokes. I paused and I said, hey, you know what? I said, they're just trying to get, trying something new. Let's not put a stick in their spokes. I said, if you have concerns or if they're not unappreciative or not kind, please talk to me. I'm one of the coaches and I'm happy to help. He says, no, everybody that I've met's been kind. He says, there's just a lot of bikes on the trail. And I said, I hear you. One of the things that we're looking at doing with this, as I understand it, is a downhill only trail. And if that's the case, I think it would benefit everybody. And I hope it's the case. I know I've ridden other areas that have downhill only trails, one-way trails, and it does work. People come from all over South Jordan has one of those, and we ride down there as often as we can, and Draper. So with that, I'm all for looking for alternative ways to pay for things as well as support local business. And I think that needs to be reiterated, especially this year. Keep as much money here in Bountiful supporting local business, and whether it's Bountiful, Centerville, Farmington, or Salt Lake. But I do want us to invest in our future and in the future of Bountiful. We have a great city here, and I would love to see us to continue to be progressive in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Another opposed?
Greg Mortensen, 404 West, 3200 South here in Bountiful. I have a lot of hobbies too, and I self-fund my hobbies. I've never asked anyone to pay a part of my hobby or to fund a part of it. I've actually avoided that when I've gone hiking and those types of things. I'll usually put some money in the little containers and stuff to make sure I'm paying my share of it, which probably isn't covering it all. But besides, I've got other hobbies besides that, obviously. And so I just hope that we think about that, you know, is it really fair to ask, you know, folks that might be struggling to fund or shoulder a part of that cost? And I just don't think it is. So I hope we'll consider that with this bond. Secondly, you know, I played hockey for Utah State University long time ago now. And back then we were helping raise money to get an ice rink. They've got the George Eccles Ice Center there. And I'm gonna follow up with the manager tomorrow. But as I recall, and when I went to their site, it took them 7 years and they raised $4.5 million. And it was all, you know, voluntarily funded. And so as we do this, I guess kind of stole my thunder on that, I'd hope we'd look at those alternatives to funding this, that we look at those private and really make it a true community project, kind of like the Veterans Park. I helped out with that and donated to that. And again, it didn't put a burden on anyone else to do so. We were able to fund that project. And so I think as we go forward with this, we look at those opportunities to really come together and bind ourselves as a community to raise these funds and to make these real citizen, you know, completely citizen-based projects. You know, I've built trail before. I'd be happy to get on a trail and build. You know, my son was one of the chapter leadership for Order of the Arrow here in the local area, or, you know, went from clear north. But anyhow, you know, we're used to building trails, so we can do those things. I think there's just a lot of great opportunity there for service and really coming together and serving ourselves as a community for true service and true community projects. Thanks.
Thank you. And another 4.
Richard Higginson, 195 West, 200 North. You know, 25 or 26 years ago, my wife and I looked around for a great place to raise a family. And we came to Bountiful because of the fact that Bountiful was the best city in Utah. And we still think it is. Anyway, Bountiful is a great place because it had great leadership for a long time. And without commenting on its existing leadership, I'm going to say that all of us benefit every day because of that leadership and because of an investment that was made for us in the past. I know that a comment was just made about hobbies and not having people fund hobbies. You know, the Veterans Park was funded, first of all, by a land grant from Bountiful City. And without that piece of property, the Veterans Park would probably still not be off the ground. I contributed to the park. I love the park. It's beautiful. But it was a community project too. Every time we go in the mountains, every time we go to a lake and fish or boat, every time we go anywhere in Utah on public land, we're taking advantage of the taxes that have been paid that fund the maintenance of that property and possibly the purchase of that property originally. So I don't want us to pretend that we're all rugged individualists that aren't benefiting from taxes that somebody has paid, probably our ancestors have paid, to set up a pretty nice system for us. I think it's the least that I can do when an opportunity comes up like the Washington Elementary property to make an investment for future generations so that my grandkids are going to have additional park space to play on, so that we don't have to drive to Tooele or to North Ogden to play our games. Additionally, you've gotten a flyer. I just would encourage you to take the stuff in that little trifold flyer with a grain of salt. Most of it's not accurate. and I'd be happy to visit with you about what's not later. But Bountiful City is great because we as a community have done a lot of really good things together. You worry about water, Bountiful City is set on water. We have no issues. It's because we've had good leadership for a long time. I hope that we can curate the wonderfulness that is Bountiful, pay our share as we have the opportunity to preserve wonderful things for the future generations to come, not take advantage of the shade that others have provided us without continuing to invest and give that to the future. Thanks.
Someone against?
I'm Blaine Phillips. I'm not really for or against. My wife and I came here to kind of decide. We live close to North Canyon Park on Bridlewood Drive. And my wife especially, and we like to go out walking and like to go to the parks. We go to the park quite often. The main reason we came today is what we'd like to have is we'd like to have restrooms, porta potties in the parks when they close up. That's my main concern. And North Salt Lake does that. We go up to we go from our house to Tunnel Springs Park. They have porta potties at the parks, and I want to find out why we couldn't spend a little bit of money and have porta potties in the parks. I think that's really important. And we use the trails a lot. I'm a lot more interested in trails than I am another city park. But one of the things we were really disappointed in this spring was like North Canyon Park. It said, well, the playgrounds were all closed to the kids. They couldn't use them. And then instead of being able to go to the restroom and wash your hands, it says, make sure you practice social hygiene, but then you couldn't go into the bathroom and wash your hands. Everything's closed. And then not only that, they put a new urinal in that park in North Canyon, but the soap dispenser's broken, and if we're supposed to practice good social hygiene, I'd just like to see the parks taken better care of, and so we could wash our hands and keep them open, especially let the kids. I thought it was very sad that we do a little bit of traveling, and parks for little kids and stuff this spring were completely blocked off, even though it was shown that outdoors kids don't spread the disease very much, and the parks are safer out there. So we're still kind of debating if we want to invest in the parks because we really love the trails. Those that go to Muir Park, there's a Kenny Creek Trail if you like just hiking. It's just to the left side. It's almost used very, very little. A lot of trees blew down there. And if you go straight into Muir Park, you can go to the Burro Mine Trail. Both those two are pretty rugged, and also the North Canyon Trail. And then you don't have to worry about bikes hardly at all on those others, except for North Canyon a little bit. So we're kind of still just making up our minds, but that's one thing we'd like to see, especially probably number one is have porta potties in the winter, because my wife and I would go out walking I just retired, and she goes out every morning. It's about 5 miles, and it's handy to have a porta potty, and also like along Bountiful Boulevard, that'd be handy for us too. Thank you.
And someone for the bond, please.
Hi, my name is Calvin Eddings. I live at 405 South, 1000 East in Bountiful. I'm a parent of 4 kids, 18, 16, 13, and 8. They all played soccer. My youngest is playing soccer. My 13-year-old's playing soccer. And this is my coaching outfit for soccer. I coach my 13-year-olds. We're part of the Surf Soccer Club, which has a lot of presence here in Bountiful and also Centerville. I just wanted you to hear from kind of a soccer parent and a soccer coach. I just first want to say I appreciate the dissenting opinions. I think they've been great thoughts. They're helping me think about it. But I'll just kind of tell you my experience with soccer. And I also have 2 lacrosse players too, one that played at Bountiful High. In fact, my Bountiful High player practiced a lot at Washington when the school was still there, and it was a great place for the Bountiful High team to practice. My team practices at Muir Park Junior High, and someone did some great planning for that park and that green space because it can house a lot of fields. So when I go on Tuesdays and Thursdays are when we practice, and often I'll show up to a baseball game on the north and football practice on the lower field, possibly 1 or 2 soccer games, soccer on the upper field and lower field, maybe a couple soccer practices, including my own, and lacrosse practices too. So it gets used really well. Now it can be crowded. I've had to find other places to practice. I've even considered practicing in Centerville because they have that great big 4-diamond field that I figured maybe I'd have a better chance of not running into, no fields available. So anyway, I just want you to know those fields get used. Our soccer club, Surf, we have 65 teams and that many coaches, that many kids and parents that are traveling, investing. We play fall and spring, we play summer tournaments, we practice in the winter. So we're kind of full on soccer. And then soccer parents that are a little more casual are the recreation soccer, which is put on by the Forza Football Club and South Davis Rec Center. There's 2 rec programs, and they have a lot of soccer players too. So we're talking thousands of players, parents. So I was so excited to see that space might be available. I just want to say, we can't miss the opportunity to use that space. That's really important to me. I think there's been some great ideas. I'd love to hear the city kind of answer some of the ideas that have come up so that I understand better why we can't do some of the alternative funding. But to me, a bond is reasonable, and I would very much support it and support the trails. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michelle Wise, 2812 Southview Circle, and I've got a list of reasons why I oppose this. For long-term residents of Bountiful City, that property was once bonded to build an elementary school, so we've already paid for that property once. Now they're selling it back to us as the city, so I feel like that's a little bit of double taxation. We're in the middle of an economic crisis, and we're putting more stress and more burden on small businesses. I happen to work for a small business, and she is struggling right now, and to add even more burden to her is unfair. I dislike the fact that they put the park and the trails on the same bond, because I think a lot of people are in favor of the trails. I think that's a great idea. I think that's a great way to improve our community. I am not in favor of a park. I don't like the fact that we're going into debt, $8 million. And there's also, and the other thing I didn't like about it is when they're talking in favor of the park, the information I got said if Bountiful City doesn't buy it, most likely a developer will buy it and put in high density housing. Well, Bountiful City has the control to determine what goes in there, and they can say that only single family homes can go in there, which would be an improvement in the neighborhood. There's an extreme housing shortage. I don't know if any of you have looked for a home lately. I have children in that age bracket that are looking for homes. You can't find anything around here for less than $400,000 unless it's a complete fixer-upper. So to add 40 or 50 more homes to Bountiful City would be a benefit to those looking for homes. We talked about the water shortage. I heard at the legislature last year that they're talking about metering water, secondary water, because there is such an extreme shortage and people waste it. So that's another concern of watering 10 more acres of grass. So I'd be interested to talk to Richard to find out about that. And I wish I didn't come here intending to speak, but at the bottom of that brochure, I believe there was something about this isn't the final amount, that they could actually ask for or spend more money than what they have proposed, more than the 8 million. And I don't like that it's unlimited. There's the perpetual cost of maintaining a park, which we've already heard about. And Bountiful City also has failing infrastructure. I have seen personally in the last year roads collapsing. We had a sinkhole on the road that I live on that was probably 20 feet long. The entire road caved in because the pipes are old. Is this the time that we need to be spending money on things that we have more important things to spend money on?
Thank you. And another 4. Yeah. Yeah.
My name is Glenn Dial. I live at 95 West, 900 North. Obviously, I'm not doing a lot of recreating right now. Hopefully that'll change. My thought is that if the city purchases this large parcel of ground, 10 acres, I heard, that perhaps they set aside 2 or 3 of those acres for other development that they could sell off to help offset the cost of this development. I'll travel throughout the Wasatch Front and even into Morgan, where I have grandchildren, to watch them participate in activities. So that's my thought.
And another against the bond?
Tim Gregory, I live near Tolman Park. I'm not so sure I'm for or against. I mean, I like the idea of open space. I do not like the idea of this brochure being sent out and not suggesting what this gentleman talked about, that the school system has already plowed the school down and flattened it out, and it intends on making ground or fields for that. I don't see anything in this document saying that, and I find that a little bit disingenuous on the part of the city to not put that in a pros and a con. I also do not like the fact that everything is wrapped up into one big pork barrel thing like you'd see Congress do, throw that in the bottom of the bill to wrap it all up. You can't have one without the other type thing. I don't see why it can't be separated. Also, just from the standpoint, I walk Tolman Park every day. I have a dog and I walk there every day. What I notice is that just the simple things like emptying the trash and picking the dog refuse cannot be done on a timely weekly basis. I am constantly calling the Parks and Recreation Department and telling them that the trash needs to be emptied and the dog refuse needs to be emptied as well. It is overflowing. Now, next to the tennis court, there is no longer a dog refuse container. Now they have a full trash can. I don't know what happened to it, but anyway, long story short is, if you can't be trusted in the little things, you can't be trusted in the big things. And I feel like this is a big thing. Grabbing 10 more acres of land, which sounds great, but it sounds like more people need to be hired in order to take care of that property. And God knows how many people you need for the trails in order to keep that going. And every time I've called and mentioned, that things need to be done at Tolman, it's, well, we don't have the manpower for it, and it's like, okay, so let's get more. So we have to hire more people then apparently. And that's the part I don't really understand, why those particular finances can't be projected at what they're gonna cost. You know what, if you're gonna put it on the ballot, then people need to know what they're gonna be up against. So I feel like it's disingenuous to put this brochure out, and I feel like it's a little bit of propaganda to me to not have all the facts. So.
And 1-4?
Good evening. My name is Kate Bradshaw. I reside at 379 North, 650 East in Bountiful. Growing up in Bountiful, I played my soccer games and held my soccer practices at Washington Elementary. Even though it wasn't the closest field to my house, it was the closest one our team could secure to practice and play our home games on. And so that is how I first became familiar with Washington Elementary, even though I am a proud graduate of Leo J. Muir Elementary School. One of my favorite things to do in Bountiful, and I do it every week during the good weather months, is ride my mountain bike to Elephant Rock. I find nothing is more refreshing and head clearing than that pounding heart climb up to the rock, and then that beautiful view overlooking Bountiful, where I stop and I catch my breath before I make the turn back down to home. If I'm feeling super ambitious, maybe I go to Rudy's Flats, but only towards the end of the season when my legs are up for it. And when I'm coming down, I have a little bell on my bike and I make sure I ding it as I come around the blind corners. And because I grew up on that trail, I know where those blind corners are. And so I try to make sure I proactively am alerting people that I'm coming, and I'm no longer of an age where I feel the need to go fast down from Elephant Rock. But no matter how careful you are on that trail, as you come around a blind corner, you encounter other hikers and other bikers, and usually you're able to both maneuver in time, but sometimes you're not. And that could be the sad part of a ride when someone says harsh words as you're trying to make sure that you can both share the trail. When this opportunity to purchase Washington Elementary and to consider a bond for trails came before the City Council, it was something, quite frankly, I was excited about. As someone who grew up in Bountiful and knows our lack of field space and knows our pinch points on these trails, was very excited about this opportunity. And then the pandemic hit, and all of our worlds changed. Earlier this spring, Councilwoman Barr and I, as we wrestled with this decision and what to do and how we can make it work, we decided we would meet and walk around Washington Elementary and think about the park, think about the neighborhood, and think about whether we could come up with any other ways to do this. And we brainstormed off-the-wall ideas. We thought of all the couch cushions that the city has and whether we could find any funds in those couch cushions. And we put the staff to work trying to see if they could help us cobble together enough money to buy the park. At the end of the day, we could not do so without dipping into the city's rainy day funds. And I think those rainy day funds are sacred. And so instead, the council decided that we would ask all of you, if this is important to you, if this opportunity that doesn't come along very often is important to you, please vote yes and support the bond. Thank you.
And against?
My name is Anne Marie O'Born, and I live at 987 Millstream Way. And I appreciate all of the hard work that you do for our city. And I can see that the money that you would do probably would be to a good use. However, my concerns are like the first man who spoke against. There are so many that are on the edge. When I was growing up, my mother was a single mom. She had 7 children. And because of church welfare, we didn't have to move. And I think that was a tremendous blessing. And I do think that people have come up with wonderful ideas to supplement, and especially those people that use it and those kids, they can do a lot to do that. I know that it's a very busy trail. And so I am concerned too of the businesses that are going to have their taxes raised. And my heart goes out to them. I could probably contribute some money to this if I would, and 20 years is a long time. If the bond was shorter, that would please me more. No bond would please me even more. One lady said the seniors get help here and there, and so she didn't mind that the taxes were raised. But all of us want to be responsible for ourselves and not have to go and get help from the government or the church if we can. My mother sold our home, and she took that money and she paid the bishop back for the money that he used to help us through that hard time.
And it's an important thing to teach your children. I have never forgotten that. I have not gotten in debt for anything except my home. And I would love to, I've contributed a little bit of money to the Veterans Park. Thank you for having that property so that they could have that. But I think this is something that all of us can contribute. If you want, maybe have something where we opt in, those that can afford it, that would be wonderful. And just being patient during this time when people have had loss of jobs and things like that. I haven't suffered because of that, but there's many who are. And we need to be patient, maybe put it off till next year. Thank you so much. I agree with all of the ones that have been against, and I have agreed with many of the things that people have said that are for them. I just want to see a different path than obligating everybody through the taxes. Thank you.
And a person for, please.
Hi, my name is Paul Muir, and I grew up at 1088 South 400 West. Trust me, I'm not sick. But I go to my dad's quite often, who does live there now. But I grew up going to Washington Elementary, and I remember my cousins and our relatives would walk down to the Washington Elementary and throw ball, or we'd have picnics sometimes, and there are no spaces anywhere around where I grew up where there is room to throw a ball for kids to run around. There aren't any, but this Washington property is a prime location for a park. It's right by a major road, 5th West, and there are homes and apartments there that could really use a park. I believe the area needs revitalization, and I believe that a park would do it, that people could have picnics there. It would be a place, the only place I know of that would be big enough to handle a fair-sized group of people, or multiple groups. The dog park, I also grew up right by it, and it can only handle 1 or 2 families, and that's the only park in the area. But wouldn't it be great to have picnics there, or be able to take a walk as an older couple? I'm not an older couple, but I believe we will not regret that. Even though there may be some people that really struggle, and I understand that, but I believe we will not regret it, and it will help to get kids out of the house, away from the video games, and we will save money on those kinds of expenses. I don't know if it would be as much as the park costs, but I believe you will not regret it. Thank you.
And against?
Not really for or against, we're still sort of neutral, but I'll go on the against side because I have a few questions that might be perceived as negative, even though that's not really the intent. My name is Mark Dustin. We live on Carolyn Way. We've lived here since '94. We have 2 boys, and they grew up. And I was a soccer coach as well. They grew up playing baseball, soccer, football. They both swam for Bountiful. They wrestled, been very active. My wife loves hiking, and I love her, so I hike too. I've never felt unsafe on the trails, but yeah, they get busy. On my street, there are 4 widows, and they're on a fixed income. So I see both sides of the issue, and we really haven't made a choice. The questions I have are more about the other side of the picture that I don't think we've seen yet. One of the other comments is, why don't we split them? That wasn't a coincidence. That's a tactic. You bundle it all together and you try to sell it. And I'm sure that that's what the firm that got paid almost 30 grand recommended. That's a tactic to try to get people to buy things. When you go to a car dealership and you buy a car, one of the tactics is focus on the incremental, not the total cost of ownership. The total cost of ownership is not just the out the door price, it's the maintenance and everything. And Bountiful doesn't have a great track record over the years that we've been here. It's gotten worse, not better. A lot of things aren't maintained. I also happen to support as a career, I'm an analyst for the church, and I support risk management. The church gets sued all the time every time somebody slips and falls in a pothole that you didn't notice. What's that going to cost? What's the insurance going to cost to cover a new sports complex? The incremental cost is all that we've been told. What's the total amount of money that's expected to be generated? Is this a $20 million bill over the course of the 20 years, or a $30 million bill? I'd like to know the total cost, not just it's $8 million now. I would also like to know what the breakdown is. Some of those points were made. We only know part of it. And what is that breakdown? Why do we need $2.5 million to make a field when we already have a field? I'd like to know the answers to these things before we can make a decision. Truthfully, we really haven't made a decision. I see both sides of the issue. I see the benefit to the community. I also see the impact to people. That's one of the other questions I would have. In a cost-benefit analysis, the cost side is clear. We know everybody who owns a house, 16,000 houses or whatever in Bountiful, are going to be paying the cost. Who benefits? What percentage of the total population will use the trails or will use the fields is something to consider. And I'd like to know the answers before I vote. And I would also like to see better clarity in the future. Don't just sell it back to me after it's already on the ballot. Tell me in advance and let me make a decision. That's what I'd like. Thanks.
And a 4. You and then 4 next, yeah.
My name is Andrew Applegate. I grew up in Sunset Hollow, and I recently returned to Bountiful, thankfully, and bought a home on Center Street. As a longtime resident of Bountiful, I think right now we are what I would call at a pivotal juncture in our city. We have a choice to make right now. We have in front of us an opportunity to preserve green space and to create more trails. And the city's asking us as citizens, what are we going to choose? I'd like us to think about this from a macro perspective for a second. Think about what Utah was like and the Wasatch Front was like 50 years ago, for those of you who are alive, 30 years ago. How much has it changed? And I'll tell you one of the principal things, even not having been alive at that time, is development. We have seen homes, we have a small piece of land from the mountains to the lake where we can develop, and more that's being developed. So we have an opportunity right now to preserve 10 acres, and beyond that, we have an opportunity to make new trails. That's a significant opportunity. Many have said, well, I'd like to do private funding to have trails or to have more parks. My question for you is, why hasn't that come yet? And if it hasn't come yet, is it going to come in the future? And I think the odds are that it won't. So we have in front of us an opportunity. I'd like to talk about the trails for a second. So many people have mentioned one trail, and it's Muir Park. And there's a reason for that. Bountiful really only has one trail that a family, because of the grade, the length, etc., that they can walk on, that they can comfortably bike on. Think about Holbrook Canyon, how steep it is, how narrow it is. Think about Kenny Creek, how steep it is. Think about North Canyon, how you have to go up a Jeep track just to get to the trail. This represents a huge opportunity for us, and this opportunity isn't going to come every day. Muir Park specifically, by having a downhill trail, will be safer. Another thing that's important about Muir Park is that it represents, I'm a huge mountain biker, I broke my hand doing it earlier this week. It represents this massive opportunity for us. As a mountain biker, I look at Muir Park and I think there doesn't need to be one trail, there could be 10 trails. And what I think this bond could do for us is start a stone rolling on down the hill. Once we get 2 trails in Muir Park, how much easier is it going to get to have 3, and then 4, and then 5? Another thing to think about, the more trails we have, the more green space we have, how is that going to increase our property values? And will that increase in our property value actually offset the cost of any of these property taxes? Thank you for your time.
And against?
I'm Crystal Dial, 95 West, 900 North, with my dad. I actually got a survey from the Bountiful City, which was really nice, asking me for the first time a few months ago that this was coming up and might be on the ballot and how I felt about it. One of the things it did say was, in its ABCD multi you choose thing, was, are there anything else? And I pushed that a lot. I've lived here my whole life. I grew up here playing soccer. There are places you can find things for different stuff. Sure, things can be better maintained or we could use more, but they are out there. Something that I have seen, I've been doing daycare. My mom's been doing daycare since 1991, so for 30 years. And listening and hearing and seeing and being with kids and parents all the time, something that we don't have here in this area is a splash pad. If you go to parks that we do have now that have any water features, where do you see the kids? Not as many on the toys, but they're in the water. Like with the new creek site over by Bountiful High, if the water's been turned off right now because of COVID, so a lot of people aren't even on the park, they're down in the river, in the creek. I really think that that is something that I would like to see is a splash pad. So if that's, I don't know how to go about that or how I need to show that that is something that we probably would like more for as residents, as the new ice rink. I've been going over there since it finally opened, and that is something I've seen. People aren't really playing around on that field right there. They're sitting around. I'm like, oh, they're eating, they're getting fizz. If the fizz is open, I wasn't sure. But they're there, and I was like, oh, they're here because all the kids, even though that's not a splash pad or whatever, it's a water feature, but all the kids were there playing in the water. So I really think we need something more. That's something that grandparents can do. They can go take the kids to a splash pad. That's something that parents can do. That's something that babysitters can do. We need something that everyone can go to. And a splash pad, I think, is something you can do with kids, and even up to teenagers. My daughter would still do it. So thanks.
We'll have a couple in a row against if we could. So if there's someone against.
Excuse me. My name is Dave Barnett. I live at 16 South Davis Boulevard. And I apologize if I'm going to repeat some things that have been said already, but I don't see any reason why we can't compromise on this. There's a park that's now built on Pages Lane. They built a whole bunch of townhomes, and I believe that the developer set aside that park, and it was contracted in that they would build the park, and there's no reason why we can't have both. As for Mr. Applegate's point about the trails, I think they're very important, and I would like to see these be 2 separate items, because I think both are very important. I think at this time, at this opportunity, why not let developers build a park for us? And we can have our cake and eat it too. We can have income from developed property, and we can have a park that's paid for by individual people who we just write that into whatever code. I don't know. I'm not in the government. I don't know if that's a possible thing, but it seems like you can make something like that happen. And I would just like to reiterate that this doesn't have to be together. It can be taken in separate, and we can have both items, and I think they're both very important.
Thank you. Another against? Okay, got another 4, please.
My name is Christian Barr. I live at 1413 East Center Street Circle. It's a tough issue. I recognize, you know, the for and against. I recognize all the thoughts that everyone has that has gone into this. I'm, I guess, here to speak for the kids that can't vote. I have 3 little kids, 2 7-year-olds and a 5-year-old. When I was a kid, I played Little League football, and we played our games at fields where the rec center now stands. And I love the rec center. It's about sharing. The Bountiful, Viewmont, and Woods Cross swim teams all share the rec center. And you can go to Lone Peak High School where they have their own tennis courts and their own swimming pool. You can go to Brighton High School where they have their own swimming pool and pay the property taxes there. But I commend our city and county for having the foresight to have a pool and a rec center that all 3 high school teams can use. I drove with my 7-year-old son the other day to Centerville, where the Bountiful Little League football teams play their home games. And it's an 11-minute drive from the Washington Elementary property to the field in Centerville. And so the moms and dads that have Little League football players drive an extra 22 minutes to go to a home game. That might only be 5 or 6 games a year. I actually commend the city council for preserving also the rainy day funds. I think that's actually fantastic foresight to not spend those funds and squeeze every last drop out of the rainy day funds. So I don't see a reason why the open fields can't be shared with lacrosse, with soccer, with Little League football. I don't see a reason why we can't have a splash pad and a skate park. One item with I got a brochure as I walked in, and it's frequently asked questions prepared by Mr. Mortensen. It says, won't the property be sold to developers for high density housing if Bountiful does not buy it? And he says, it's clear that the school district needs this property for high school sports. That's true. The next paragraph says, hasn't the school district violated its fiduciary duty? The appraised value of this highly desirable commercial acreage is $4.6 million. That is also true. And even though the school district has spent $400,000, and I'm not making decisions for the school district, but I can guarantee you, even though they put $400,000 into it, they would turn around and sell it if the bond doesn't pass for $4.6 to $5 million, and it would be turned into housing, whether it be single family homes or multi-family units. And I think, as has been mentioned, this is a unique opportunity to preserve green space. Thank you.
Thank you. And someone against? Now, I want to remind you that I'm sure there's some out there that are just a little nervous about getting up in front of everybody and saying something, but you came, so say, oh, you too, Gary? Yeah. So if you have something to say, this is a good chance. Just be brave, okay? Anyone else against? Four, okay, we'll do 4s now then. Thank you.
My name's Bob Larson. I live at 1970 South 800 East. I grew up in Bountiful. I've lived here for a lot of years. I own a small business here, have for about 25 years. I love Bountiful. I think it's a great city. Raised my kids here. I grew up here, went to Viewmont High School, have had a great experience my whole life in Bountiful. I think great cities have great infrastructure, and Bountiful has in the past had great infrastructure, and then we grew and we kept growing, and our infrastructure didn't grow. We've had the same trails in Bountiful since I moved here 43 years ago. Not one new trail. I walked those trails as a 10-year-old, and I walk those trails today, same trails. We had home fields for our youth football teams to play on when I grew up here. Now, Bountiful City has no fields, 0. that aren't attached to a school. It's the only city that I can think of anywhere that doesn't have privately owned fields. So I think our infrastructure didn't grow as fast as our city grew, and we were a small farming community, and now we're just part of the Wasatch Front, and we didn't grow quick enough our infrastructure. We need new trails, we need green space. There is no 10-acre plot of land in Bountiful available if the city doesn't buy this. And I commend the city council for having the foresight to say, we've got to buy this now or it's going to be gone forever. And I don't think we'll ever get 10 acres back. I don't know of another way creatively that we could get this property. It will be gone in December if we don't buy this as a city now. So I think it's very important that we vote yes on this bond. I think there's not another option. And I think the city council has tried hard for other options and haven't been able to find one. Thank you.
Were you up before? No, that's okay. Just one time. Well, yeah, the city council can always do that. But thank you. We'll get Gary to just answer that for you. Anyone else? Please.
Hi, good evening. I'm Kevin Moon. I live at 1023 Millstream Way. I've lived in Bountiful for a lot of my life. I moved here as a kid. I moved away as when I was first married. We lived in a lot of beautiful places around the world. Seattle, Washington, just outside of New York City, Chapel Hill, North Carolina. When we chose to move back to Utah, we chose to live in Bountiful again because my wife and I grew up here. And I love driving up 1800 South towards my home to see Muir Park Canyon. And I really love, and I'll tell you, that Bountiful has the most beautiful sunsets of anywhere I've ever been. We're really lucky that way. I am disappointed with some of the ways that the city has changed, like Bob talked about. Same trails, we don't have the trails that we need. I go to St. George, I go to Draper, I go to Park City. Those are communities that I think are really invested in the people that live there. It's not just a place to live, it's an experience living there. And I think we can be better about creating a space we're really proud of. I'm very proud of this place. I live here because I want to. New York City has this beautiful park called Central Park. If you haven't seen it, you need to go. New York City doesn't need more houses. That is prime real estate. It's a great place. We need places like that for our citizens that live in this city. We do. And we have these beautiful foothills, and it is harder and harder to enjoy those foothills. One major trail, and that's what we have to recreate on. Honestly, it's a shame. I think the city has tried, at least they've talked about it for a long time, to add more trails, and nothing's happened. We have an opportunity now to create space in the foothills and in our city for our citizens to have a great quality of life. I had 2 kids play lacrosse. Our home games were in Woods Cross. That's silly. Honestly, we can do better than that. So I appreciate the opportunity to voice my opinions. I'm grateful to live in this great city. It's a beautiful place. We're really blessed. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Kevin. Anyone else that hasn't been up? Well, we've already had, I apologize, but we're. He'll address that. Yeah. He'll address that.
I have 2 minutes at the end, and I'll answer it.
Yep.
Okay. It's a valid question. There's a lot of
Good. Please.
Sean Staley, 857 South, 400 West. I think I maybe add one new thought to the matter. We grew up just a stone's throw from Washington Elementary. 4 kids went there, my wife as well. Fine place. Interesting to me that, well, perhaps first of all, I like the idea of the park with a twist, and that be part of it, allow for low density income. Not income, excuse me, housing, low density housing. Our home is now empty. We have a comfortable home. I'd love to sell it to a family, and we'd love to move to a place still in the area that is smaller and reasonable, and that would work for us, and maybe it'd help pay for the land. But I suggest there's one other thought that hasn't come across our minds we haven't spoken about here, and there are intangibles to fields. I grew up on a soccer field near the City Hall offices there. We had great tans in those years, me and my friends. We just spent a lot of time on that field. We took 2 state championships because of it in high school. I look back on my friends, and we are still friends. And every one of them is a major contributor to life. One is an admiral in the military, many professionals, all of them good citizens of the community. And I attribute that in part to being raised on a field with the team. I drove past that field on the way here, Washington Elementary. There were at least 3 football teams out there playing when I went by. Maybe more, a little hard to tell. They're all bunched together. But there's never a time you don't see activity going on there, at least in the evenings. There's a lot of activity. It's a great way to raise children today. I wish we had cows. I think that'd be wonderful. But we don't have cows. And now a great way is to raise children on fields and where they can run and play and learn teamwork and sportsmanship and civility. I consider one of the grand experiences of my life to spend time with friends like that. So I suggest there's more intangibles than what we appreciate with that. Just as a sideline thought, it's curious to me that those away from the area are less inclined to the bond, and those close to the area who would be most affected by it want the bond. Without some change in the road structure there, it will be impossible to live in that area. That is, it's poorly designed, and it would be an opportunity poor for those of us who have to live there. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have about.
We just have a point of order. We're not people who want to talk about against it. There's a lot more people talking for it. Look at the public commentaries in, so that it's not a whole voting for the against.
Yeah, it's been fairly even, and we've had 22 out of the 27 people that are here that have spoken, and I think that's really remarkable. Really appreciate it. I think if there's anybody who hasn't spoken, you're welcome to come up now. Please, Millie.
My name is Millie Segura Barr, and I live at 1413 East Center Street Circle in Bountiful. And like my colleagues who have spoken before, and in full disclosure, for those of you who may not know, I serve on the City Council here in Bountiful. And I, excuse me, I think, or I hope that it would be understood, or at least conveyed to the people who are listening in, that the City Council did not enter into this decision lightly. We recognize that there are many hard economic factors that our residents are currently being faced with. I think everyone in this room can say they have been economically impacted this year because of the unfortunate circumstances surrounding this pandemic. And not only that, but the loss of life. I'm sure people in this room know people who have passed away. Because of that, please know that the members, that myself and my colleagues were very mindful of this decision. And because of that, we felt it was prudent and wise to put it to the voters, for the voters to decide whether or not they would like more trails, more green space, places for their families and friends to gather. Along with that, just if I may address a few concerns that have been brought up in regard to the money that the school district has invested into the property. The question was, well, if they invested $400,000 into the property, why can't we just keep it a playing field and have that, since they've already invested that? We, the city, can't control how the school district chooses to spend that money. If they choose to invest that money in that property for sprinklers or sod, that is completely up to them, a decision that is made independent of us. Moreover, if you ask a member of the school board, the reason the school board did that was to strictly be a good neighbor for the citizens who live in that area. So it wouldn't be an eyesore, so it wouldn't be a liability. So it was a courtesy for those neighbors. And excuse me. And along with that, well, I better leave it at that. But since I only have 30 seconds left, as a mother with 3 young kids who really feels a responsibility to not only my children, but my grandchildren, I feel like this is a wise investment for our city and for generations to come. And I truly think that because of the foresight, it will serve our community well for many years. So thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. With that, I think that what we'll do now as the final to the evening, unless there's somebody going to quickly say they've got their brave hat on and they're ready to go, we'll turn some time over. Okay. Well, I'm glad you took me up on my invitation. Thank you. I know.
By the hat, you can probably tell I'm for the trails. I know we had a pandemic, but I just had the greatest summer of my life. I got to coach all these young kids mountain biking, get them out doing something that a lot of them weren't comfortable doing, and to see them grow in their skills, but also how polite they were on the trails. But someone just pointed out, all we have is Muir Park. We go to Park City, we go to all these other places. And my family, we go travel all over. And something that isn't mentioned is, and with these green spaces for lacrosse and all these other sports, is when we travel around to those places, we spend money there. Okay, people are gonna come here to go to those trails. They're gonna come use these fields. They're gonna spend money here. So I think it's just something to think about. It's not just a money pit. People are gonna come and they're gonna spend their money here. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. So really, I'm going to be more accurate now. 25 out of 30, I think, is what we've had. So that's really impressive for all of you to participate so much. So in this final segment, we're going to ask Ron Mortensen to come up for a couple of minutes and just do some concluding statements and maybe answer a couple of questions. And then our final person will be our city manager, Gary Hill. And then we'll adjourn. Okay? Please, Ron.
You know, I really appreciate all the comments and the proposed solutions, alternatives, and everything else that came up. I might just end up with reiterating a couple of questions and letting people consider these when voting. And again, is it right to increase property taxes on the most vulnerable in our community and on our small businesses at a time of really economic hardship and when many people are relying on food banks? You know, and if the school district's they've leveled the property, they're putting in the grass, they're doing everything on that. It's already a play field now. It's going to be, the school district told me that in the spring, it's going to be ready for high school sports. If you listen to the school board meeting when they declared it surplus, they said, we have got to keep access to this property and we will require, before we sell the property, an interlocal agreement. Whereas the city will have to agree that we can continue to use these playing fields, which raises the question, how much time will be available for other teams if high schools, the 3 major high schools in this area, plus maybe some junior highs, are using those playing fields? So that's a question you have to look at. We don't know what specific projects are going to be built. We've heard about pickleball, we've heard about skate parks, we've heard about playgrounds, we've heard about everything. Again, this is, you know, you have to vote for it in order to find out what you're getting. Given Bountiful's lack of retail space, you know, this hasn't been brought up, but what about using that for retail? It's close to 5th South and 5th to West. It's right there, right off the freeway. It could be used for that. We talk about we don't have enough room for playing fields. The city owns 8 acres of flat land right across from the cemetery, immediately east of the cemetery. Why hasn't that land been put into playing fields? It's sitting there fallow this year. It wasn't used for crops. And I believe at the time that was done, they could said that it could be used for playing fields. So there's lots of options out there. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. Gary?
Oh.
No, thanks, Ron.
Great questions. It would be wonderful if the school district would continue to own that property and let just Bountiful residents at the expense of the rest of the school district use it for us, but they're not willing to do that. They will sell it to us, or they will sell it, period, to be developed. And that's not me. You can talk to the school district administrator or Liz Mumford. And it's not in the brochure because it's not an option. We either have to buy it or it will be sold to be developed. Those are the residents' choices before us. The reason, as was mentioned, that they're putting money in the field now is because they decided before the council even put this on the ballot that they wanted to be good neighbors and have the field available. They also didn't know if Bountiful was going to buy it this spring or not. Again, you can verify that with the business administrator, Craig, or with Liz Mumford on the board. Third point that I wanted to answer is it's a great question about the unlimited amount that's on the bond. That is state required language, and it doesn't mean that Bountiful can raise more than $8 million. We are totally limited on that amount now that it's on the ballot. What it means is interest rates or some other things may fluctuate, so the tax amount may change based on interest rates. It does not mean that Bountiful has unlimited ability. We're stuck at 8 million. So great question. And then with zoning, the property is currently zoned as single family residential. It can be rezoned to anything. I can guarantee you based on recent experience that the pressure, if it belongs to a private developer, will to have it be rezoned as multifamily residential. That is where the demand in the market is, and why a developer will not be willing to carve out a piece for fields and for homes. It's not profitable. Finally, because I only have about 10 seconds left, the timing is challenging. We recognize that. We don't have the ability to decide when we get to buy the property, only when it was made available what to do with it. And so the choice really is up to residents now, to have the park be sold and turn into homes, or for residents to buy it and preserve it as open space. Thank you. And then last point, I'm very happy to stick around and answer questions. I do have answers to the full cost, to the liability questions, other things, but in the interest of fairness, I'm not going to spend the time here.
Yeah, so if you have any other individual questions, if there's any individual questions, please come and talk to Gary afterwards. With that, we're going to adjourn. So proud of you.
Sorry, may I mention that?
Please.
The answer to that is it may be perceived that it's a pro argument as opposed to a con argument. And in the interest of providing equal time to those that are opposed, I don't want to be perceived as arguing on behalf of things. And I'm very happy to stay and answer those questions. Yeah, I think the question really should be to Mr. Mortensen if he's willing to let me answer questions. It's up to him.
How about if we both answer the question? Yeah, I would love to hear from this. Essentially, it's a good question. How much he said, how much did it cost over the course of the 20 years? Is it 8 million or is it 20 million?
Yeah. No, we will be. But right now we are not. You don't lock in the interest rate until you actually issue the debt. And so, no, correct. It would be set at that time. So the state just requires us in this brochure to tell people that you can't count on that $32.57 being an actual number. That would be determined based on when the bonds are issued. So good question.
Thanks, Gary.
Full cost of the bonds, $8 million is the principal amount. The total cost of the bonds would be, I believe, and I don't have the numbers, the debt service schedule in front of me, but I believe it's $15 million is the principal and interest cost. So the dollar value that is given in the brochure of $32.57 includes principal and interest. That is the full cost of a 20-year bond.
That's about the price of going out to eat one time.
Thanks, Gary.
How did you come up with the average value of a home in Bountiful?
That
37
Comes Bountiful County.
370,000 seems quite low.
that is number given to us by Davis County. They are the ones who assess all the homes in the county. They provide that average home value. Sir?
Is it possible for the city to buy the property and then sell it to a developer, Applegate, do projects in the park, and have to make money to offset the cost?
So that's a very good question. And I probably need to be repeating these questions for those that are listening at home. So the question was, would it be possible for the city to buy the property and then sell a portion of it back to be developed and leave a portion for fields? I'm not 100% sure, but I'm maybe 90% sure that if we use bonds to purchase it, we do not have the ability to sell the property after that, because we've made a commitment and the taxpayers have made a commitment at that point to buy it for park space. So it would remain park space.
So it would be more wise to use some of the rainy funds to make money instead of giving it away.
So the question was, what would be more wise? I think that's an opinion. And the question that's before the voters is, do you think it's wise to raise your taxes to buy the property and improve trails or not? So that really is the only question that's in front of voters now. Yeah. Sir.
If you do, there won't be a yes or no. It would be, well, it's only going to be green space. And they would have to have it as their fields that they're intending on doing, and they've already spent $100,000 to do it. And that does not make any sense to me why they're not doing it. You probably, I'm sorry, I don't believe that's the whole section.
Well, yeah. So I can, two questions. One, again, was, has the city considered rezoning it as open space, and would that preserve it as open space and thus tie the school district's hands from selling it, or anyone else for that matter? And the second was, or comment was, that there was some disbelief that the school district would pay money to just sod the field. I can only relay what has been told to me. On the first one, no, the city council has not. Come on up, Ron. Yeah. The city has not considered rezoning it open space because that would be offensive to the taxpayers in the rest of Davis County. If we were to artificially lower the value of that property for the benefit of taxpayers at the expense of every other taxpayer in the district, I think that your neighbors would feel very offended by that. Second, it still doesn't control the property. The property could still be rezoned at a future date. In America, the only way to guarantee that property gets used the way you want it to be used is to own it. Even with zoning, zoning can always change. The only way to guarantee that the property gets used is to own it. And and councils change, city councils change, so future councils could change it. If it's purchased with bonds, it stays as open space. And So that's the answer to that one. As for the reasoning on the property being resodded, those that live in the neighborhood know that closing the school district was very controversial. I had this conversation with Craig Carter at the school district well before this was ever contemplated by the city, and he communicated to me that the school district, regardless of what was going to happen, was going to sod the property really to be a good neighbor. They in fact asked the city if we would pay the cost to do that because they were hoping we would buy it. The city declined and said, we don't know if our voters are going to approve it, so we don't think it's prudent to waste the dollars from our residents to do it. And so they've decided to do it. Ron, I think you had a comment on that point.
Because I had communication with the school district also, and then there's email threads out there that I can provide, but they said one thing that happened, I asked, what happens if Bountiful does not approve the bond? They said, we can declare that, rescind the surplus designation and keep that. And the reason that is needed, they point out that these 3 high schools in Bountiful lack field space for lacrosse and for soccer and for other sports that they have to provide in those schools. So they need that space, and that's why the interlocal agreement is so important, that we don't know yet how much time are the schools going to say they need that space and how much is going to be left over for the rest of us. They also said that they're seeding it and sodding it is so it'll be ready for spring sports. They need it for the spring high school sports. So that, on the one hand, maybe it's for the neighbors. On the other hand, there's a self-interest in there. And so that's just, we're getting a little bit different story from some of the people at the district.
Any other questions?
Thanks, Gary.
Yeah, what's the possibility of getting porta potties for?
We were writing those questions down too, and yeah, I'll have you talk to our parks director here.
Yeah.
It all costs money, and but that did remind me, and this is totally unrelated. The playgrounds, the reason they were closed, and the restrooms earlier this year, it was not us. It was Davis County Health Department that required us to close them. So, you bet. Okay.
Thank you, Gary. Hey, again, so proud of all of you coming. Almost all of you had an opinion and said what you, I hope, wanted to say and needed to say. And with that, we'll adjourn. Thank you again. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Yep. We're adjourned. Thank you.
I'd like to make all this brochure